The easiest way to measure a person is to watch how they treat someone who can do nothing for them. The sound of high heels echoed across the marble lobby of Hayes Capital just after 7 a.m. outside. Manhattan was still waking beneath a gray November sky, steam curling from subway grates, while black SUVs lined the curb like silent shadows. Inside the 72-story tower, everything gleamed. Glass, steel, polished stone. The kind of building where people wore watches worth more than most American homes and smiled only when cameras were nearby. Sophia Carter adjusted the sleeve of her cream-colored designer coat as she crossed the lobby with 2 other interns from the executive training program. At 24, Sophia had mastered the art of looking successful before actually becoming successful. Blonde hair perfectly styled, white heels sharp enough to sound expensive against the floor. Coffee in hand from a cafe where a single latte cost almost $12. She checked her reflection in the dark glass beside the elevators and smiled slightly. Tonight changes everything, one of the interns said excitedly. The networking event. Sophia nodded confidently. One good conversation with the board, and half these people won't even remember I started as an intern. She believed that. Truly. Because in Sophia's world, status was everything. Money meant intelligence. Power meant value. And people without either usually faded into the background. Near the west hallway, an older janitor slowly pushed a mop bucket across the marble floor. His gray uniform looked freshly pressed despite its age, and silver strands lined the edges of his dark hair. He moved carefully, methodically, almost invisibly beneath the flood of rushing executives. Nobody looked at him twice. Sophia certainly didn't. As she turned toward the elevator bank, her coffee slipped slightly in her hand. A splash of caramel-colored liquid spilled directly across the janitor's mop handle and onto the floor beside his shoes. "Oh my God," Sophia muttered instinctively, stepping backward before a drop could touch her heels. The 2 interns laughed quietly. The janitor looked down at the spill without irritation, without surprise. Calmly, he reached for a towel hanging from the side of his cart. Sophia exhaled sharply. This building seriously needs better staff. One of the interns snorted under his breath. "Careful," he joked. "He might charge you for emotional damages." More laughter. The older man said nothing. He simply knelt down and wiped the coffee from the marble floor with slow, practiced movements. But for a brief second, Sophia noticed something strange. The watch on his wrist. Silver. Elegant. Old money elegant. Not flashy. Not cheap either. A Patek Philippe. Her father collected watches. Sophia recognized luxury when she saw it. For a moment, confusion flickered across her face. Then she dismissed it. Probably fake. "Come on," she said, brushing invisible lint from her coat. "We're gonna miss the elevator." The janitor finally spoke, his voice low and even. "Wet floor, miss. Careful near the edge." Sophia barely looked back. "I think I can manage walking." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. She stepped inside with her friends, still smiling faintly at her own joke. As the doors closed, the older man remained alone in the massive marble lobby, quietly finishing his work while the reflection of the city lights shimmered beneath his mop like broken pieces of silver. And not one person in that building realized the man cleaning their floors owned every inch of it. By noon, the entire tower moved like a machine wrapped in polished glass and quiet pressure. Phones rang behind closed office doors. Espresso machines hissed in executive lounges. Men in tailored suits crossed hallways carrying tablets and million-dollar decisions in their hands. Sophia Carter loved every second of it. She sat at a long conference table on the 38th floor with the other interns while sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan. Yellow cabs crawled below like tiny toys. Somewhere far beneath them, ordinary people rushed through ordinary lives. But up here, Sophia felt closer to the world she believed she belonged in. "Tonight is your chance to impress people who actually matter," Vanessa Reed, the internship director, said as she paced slowly around the room. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. The Hayes Capital Winter Networking Gala is not just another corporate event. Investors from Boston, Chicago, and San Francisco will be there. Board members will be watching everything, including you. Sophia straightened slightly in her chair. "Especially you, Sophia," Vanessa added with a small smile. "Your presentation numbers this quarter were exceptional." Pride warmed Sophia's chest instantly. She had worked for this. Long nights. Endless reports. Strategic proposals nobody else her age could even understand. She was not going to fail now. One more thing, Vanessa continued. Tonight's digital presentation must run perfectly. Mr. Hayes personally requested a flawless rollout. The room quieted at the mention of the company founder, Daniel Hayes, a man nobody had seen publicly in nearly a year. Some people claimed he was recovering from health issues. Others believed he was preparing to sell part of the company overseas. Rumors traveled through Hayes Capital like expensive perfume, present everywhere, impossible to hold on to. Sophia leaned toward another intern and whispered softly, "Does anybody even know what he looks like anymore?" "Not really," the intern whispered back. "Apparently he hates attention." Sophia smirked faintly. That is usually what billionaires say after they already have all the attention. A few seats away, someone laughed quietly. Vanessa clapped once for focus. "The gala begins at 7. I expect professionalism from every person in this room." As the meeting ended, Sophia gathered her tablet and stepped into the hallway, already imagining herself shaking hands with executives beneath crystal chandeliers later that night. She barely noticed the maintenance cart parked near the elevators until she heard the familiar low voice again. "Careful, miss. Fresh wax." Daniel Hayes stood near the marble corridor with a small caution sign beside him. The polished floor reflected the lights overhead like still water. Sophia stopped abruptly before her heel touched the edge of the wet surface. "You again," she muttered under her breath. Daniel simply nodded once. "Would not want you slipping before your important evening." Something about the way he said it irritated her immediately. Calm, almost amused. Sophia crossed her arms. "You seem very informed for someone cleaning floors. People say more than they realize in hallways." His answer came quietly. Sophia studied him more carefully now. There was something strange about him. Not his clothes. Those were ordinary. But his posture was different. Straight-backed. Controlled. He spoke slowly, confidently, like someone completely comfortable being ignored. Most service workers avoided eye contact around executives. This man never seemed nervous around anyone. "You should probably focus on mopping instead of listening to conversations," Sophia replied coolly. Daniel glanced toward the towering windows overlooking the city. "Sometimes listening tells you more about people than money ever will." Sophia rolled her eyes softly. "Sure." The elevator arrived with a chime. Before stepping inside, she looked down briefly at his silver watch again. Elegant. Understated. Wrong for a janitor. "Nice fake watch, by the way," she said casually. Almost convincing. For the first time, Daniel's expression shifted slightly. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Something quieter than that. Almost sadness. He lowered his eyes toward the old silver watch on his wrist and gently adjusted the cuff of his gray uniform over it. "It was a gift," he said softly. The elevator doors slid shut before Sophia answered. As she rose toward the executive floors, she never saw Daniel standing alone beside the polished hallway, staring silently at his own reflection in the marble beneath his feet, while workers and executives passed him like he was part of the building itself. The city transformed after sunset. Manhattan glowed in gold and silver beneath the cold December sky, while snow drifted softly between skyscrapers like ash floating through light. Inside Hayes Capital, the annual Winter Networking Gala had already begun. Crystal chandeliers reflected across towering glass walls. Jazz music moved quietly through the ballroom. Waiters carried silver trays between clusters of investors, dressed in black tuxedos and silk gowns worth more than most Americans earned in months. Sophia Carter stood near the center of it all in a fitted black dress and diamond earrings her mother insisted were necessary for the right impression. She looked exactly like someone who belonged there. Confident, elegant, untouchable, at least from a distance. Boston investors just arrived. Vanessa Reed whispered while adjusting the microphone clipped to her blazer. Presentation goes live in 20 minutes. Where's the backup data file? Sophia lifted her tablet immediately. Already uploaded to the ballroom system. Vanessa nodded approvingly. Good. Tonight matters, Sophia. Board members remember people after nights like this. Sophia smiled slightly as she glanced around the room. Executives. Investors. Future opportunities standing beneath champagne-colored lights. This was the world she wanted. Not the subway. Not student debt. Not ordinary life. Across the ballroom, Hotel staff adjusted lighting near the presentation stage while maintenance workers checked cables beneath the giant digital screens hanging over the crowd. Sophia took a sip of sparkling water when she noticed a familiar figure near the edge of the stage. Gray uniform, silver watch, calm expression. The janitor again. Daniel Hayes stood quietly beside an open maintenance panel, studying something beneath the presentation monitors. Sophia frowned instantly. "Why is he even in here?" she muttered. One of the junior associates beside her shrugged. "Probably cleaning up before the investors arrive." But Daniel was not cleaning. He was watching lines of code flicker across a small diagnostic screen attached near the stage equipment. His expression tightened slightly. Then he walked directly toward Sophia. "Excuse me, miss." Sophia turned, already annoyed by his presence. "What now?" Daniel glanced toward the giant presentation screens suspended above the ballroom. "There may be a problem with the ballroom server connection. The firewall is unstable. Somebody should pause the presentation upload until the system is checked." Sophia blinked once in disbelief. Then she laughed softly. "You are giving cybersecurity advice now. I noticed unusual activity in the system while checking the wiring." "You noticed?" Sophia repeated with visible amusement. Nearby associates exchanged awkward looks. Daniel remained calm. "Data could leak if the presentation runs through the current network." Sophia folded her arms. "Listen carefully. This event includes some of the biggest investors in New York. People are under enough pressure already without maintenance staff pretending to be technology consultants." Daniel's voice stayed even. "I only thought someone should know. And I think you should stay in your lane." The words landed sharper than she intended, but Sophia did not care. She lowered her voice slightly. "You mop floors. Let the executives handle executive problems." Silence settled between them for one long second. Behind Daniel, snow drifted beyond the glass walls of the ballroom, while city lights shimmered across the river like broken stars. He looked at Sophia quietly. Not angry, not embarrassed, just tired somehow. "Very well, miss," he said softly. Then he stepped away from the stage. Sophia exhaled and adjusted her hair before turning back toward the crowd. "Unbelievable," she muttered under her breath. "Everybody wants to feel important." 20 minutes later, the ballroom lights dimmed. Conversations softened. Investors turned toward the massive digital screens suspended above the stage as the presentation music began playing through hidden speakers. Vanessa Reed walked confidently toward the podium while applause echoed gently through the room. Sophia stood near the front beside several senior executives, heart racing with anticipation. This was her project, her moment. The Hayes Capital logo appeared beautifully across the giant screens overhead. Clean, elegant, perfect. Then suddenly the image flickered. Once, twice. The music cut out. A strange silence swept through the ballroom. Sophia's smile disappeared instantly. Lines of corrupted data flashed across the screens. Internal financial reports, private investor records, confidential executive emails. One after another. Faces across the ballroom turned pale beneath the chandelier light. Whispering spread rapidly through the crowd. "Turn it off. What is happening? Who leaked this?" Vanessa froze at the podium while technicians scrambled near the control systems in panic. Sophia's stomach dropped like stone. She stared helplessly at the collapsing presentation while fragments of Daniel's warning echoed inside her mind. Data could leak. Somebody should know. Somewhere beyond the ballroom crowd, the old janitor quietly watched the screens flicker in silence. The ballroom no longer sounded elegant. It sounded afraid. Whispers spread beneath the chandeliers like cracks through glass, while confidential numbers continued flashing across the giant presentation screens overhead. Investor portfolios, executive salaries. Internal negotiations never meant to leave private boardrooms. Every few seconds, another file appeared. Another secret exposed beneath white light and frozen silence. "Shut it down," someone shouted near the control booth. Technicians scrambled behind the stage, typing frantically into laptops while executives crowded around them in growing panic. Vanessa Reed gripped the edge of the podium so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Kill the feed now," she snapped. "We are trying," one technician answered breathlessly. "The server is locked out remotely." Sophia Carter stood completely still near the front of the ballroom, her pulse hammering inside her ears. Around her, Investors exchanged uneasy glances while waiters quietly stopped serving drinks altogether. The entire night had collapsed in less than 60 seconds. And deep down, Sophia already knew exactly why. Her eyes searched the crowd instinctively until she spotted the gray maintenance uniform near the far hallway. Daniel Hayes stood beside a marble column, watching the chaos with the same calm expression he always carried. Not smug, not satisfied, just calm. Sophia swallowed hard. For the first time all evening, the room suddenly felt too warm. She moved quickly through clusters of executives and nearly collided with one of the cybersecurity managers rushing toward the server room. "What happened?" she demanded. "The firewall was compromised almost 30 minutes ago," he answered without stopping. Whoever noticed it should have reported it immediately. Sophia felt something cold settle into her stomach. 30 minutes. Exactly when Daniel warned her. Nearby, one of the investors from Chicago shook his head while staring at the corrupted screens overhead. "This company handles billions of dollars, and nobody caught this." Another executive answered quietly. "Apparently someone did." Sophia turned away before hearing the rest. Across the ballroom, Daniel bent down to quietly move a fallen champagne glass away from a crowded walkway before someone stepped on it. Even now, while executives panicked and reputations trembled beneath flashing screens, he continued doing small, invisible things nobody noticed. Something about that unsettled Sophia more than the data leak itself. Vanessa suddenly appeared beside her, furious. "Did anybody from your team know there was a system issue?" Sophia opened her mouth carefully. A maintenance worker mentioned something earlier, but Vanessa stared at her sharply. "A maintenance worker?" "He said he noticed unusual activity in the system. And you ignored it?" Sophia hesitated too long. Vanessa's expression changed instantly. Not anger anymore. Disappointment. Worse somehow. "Sophia." Before she could answer, the ballroom lights flickered once. Then the giant presentation screens finally went black. A heavy silence swept through the room. No music. No conversation. Just the distant sound of snow tapping softly against the glass windows 70 stories above Manhattan. Then every executive in the room suddenly turned toward the entrance. The atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Quiet. Controlled. Respectful. Sophia frowned slightly, confused by the sudden stillness moving across the ballroom like a wave. Near the front doors, several members of the board stood straighter. One elderly investor even adjusted his tie nervously. The ballroom doors opened slowly. Sophia expected security or legal advisors. Instead, she saw Daniel walking calmly through the entrance hallway, still wearing the gray janitor uniform, still carrying himself with that same quiet posture. But now something felt different. The room reacted to him. Executives stepped aside automatically as he passed. Conversations stopped completely. Even Vanessa lowered her eyes for half a second. Sophia looked around in confusion. "What is happening?" she whispered. Nobody answered her. Daniel stopped near the center of the ballroom floor beneath the enormous crystal chandeliers. Snowlight reflected faintly through the windows behind him, while hundreds of eyes followed every movement he made. Then the chairman of the board approached him directly. A man Sophia had only ever seen on financial magazine covers. The older executive straightened his jacket carefully before speaking. "Mr. Hayes," he said respectfully, "we deeply apologize for tonight." Sophia stopped breathing for one terrible second. The words echoed through her mind so loudly they almost drowned out the room itself. "Mr. Hayes." Her eyes widened slowly as she looked back at the man in the gray uniform. The silver watch. The calm voice. The way nobody ever seemed to intimidate him. Around the ballroom, executives stood silently while Daniel looked up at the dark presentation screens overhead. Then, with quiet disappointment more painful than anger, he finally spoke. "I warned them." No one moved after he said it. The ballroom stood frozen beneath soft golden light while snow continued falling quietly outside the glass walls of Hayes Capital. Somewhere near the back of the room, a champagne flute slipped from someone's trembling hand and shattered against the marble floor. Nobody reacted. Sophia Carter felt like the entire world had tilted beneath her feet. "Mr. Hayes." The name repeated itself endlessly inside her mind while she stared at the man she had mocked less than 12 hours earlier beside an elevator. The man she told to stay in his lane. The man she laughed at because he carried a mop instead of a title. Daniel Hayes stood calmly near the center of the ballroom while executives circled around him with visible tension. Up close, he no longer looked invisible. He looked composed, powerful in a way Sophia had never understood before. Not loud power, not expensive power, quiet power, the kind that did not need attention because it already owned the room. Vanessa Reed stepped forward carefully. Sir, cybersecurity is isolating the breach now. Daniel nodded once. How long was the vulnerability active? Approximately 37 minutes. His expression darkened slightly. And nobody thought to pause the presentation? Silence answered him. Sophia lowered her eyes immediately. Daniel glanced around the ballroom slowly, not with anger, but disappointment. Somehow that felt worse. This company was built on attention to detail, he said quietly. Small mistakes become expensive disasters when people stop listening. Nobody argued. Nobody even breathed too loudly. Sophia suddenly remembered every moment from that day with painful clarity. The coffee spill. The joke about the fake watch. Her voice telling him to focus on mopping floors. Heat rushed into her face so intensely she thought she might faint. Across the ballroom, technicians finally succeeded in shutting down the compromised server network. The giant screens overhead faded completely black, leaving only the reflection of crystal chandeliers hanging across the dark glass like floating stars. Daniel looked toward the nearest board member. Move the investors into Conference Hall B. Use the offline presentation backups. Immediately, sir. Executives scattered almost instantly, following instructions with astonishing speed. Sophia stood frozen while people rushed around her. For years, she had believed respect came from status symbols. Tailored suits, luxury offices, Ivy League resumes. But none of those people commanded the room the way Daniel Hayes did while standing in a janitor uniform beside a mop cart. That realization hurt more than humiliation itself. Daniel turned slightly and noticed her standing near the edge of the ballroom. Their eyes met for one long, unbearable second. Sophia expected anger, maybe satisfaction. Instead, she saw something quieter. Sadness. Like he had seen this exact moment happen too many times before. Then he walked toward her. Every step echoed softly across the marble floor. Sophia's heartbeat pounded so loudly she barely heard the distant conversations around them. When Daniel stopped in front of her, the ballroom suddenly felt impossibly small. Sophia opened her mouth first. I did not know. The words sounded weak immediately. Daniel studied her face calmly. No, he said softly. You did not. She swallowed hard. I am really sorry about earlier. Daniel glanced briefly toward the dark presentation screens overhead. Are you sorry because you ignored the warning? He asked quietly. Or because the janitor turned out to be the owner? The question hit harder than shouting ever could. Sophia looked down instantly. Her hands trembled slightly beside her dress. For the first time in years, she had no clever answer ready. Around them, executives continued moving investors toward another conference hall, while soft jazz music still played awkwardly through hidden speakers that nobody had bothered turning off. The melody sounded strangely distant now. Daniel lowered his voice. Do you know why I started working downstairs? Sophia shook her head carefully. Because titles hide people, he answered. When employees think nobody important is watching, they show you exactly who they are. Sophia felt her chest tighten painfully. Daniel continued calmly. Some people ignore security guards. Some insult assistants. Some treat waiters like furniture. He looked directly into her eyes then. And some believe kindness should only travel upward. Sophia blinked rapidly, fighting the sudden sting behind her eyes. Daniel noticed, but he did not embarrass her by acknowledging it. He simply adjusted the cuff over his silver watch again. That watch belonged to my father, he said quietly. He cleaned subway stations for 31 years before I built this company. Sophia stared at him speechlessly. Daniel looked toward the snowy Manhattan skyline beyond the ballroom windows. The first lesson he ever taught me, he said softly, was that a man's job is not the same thing as his worth. Then, without another word, the billionaire picked up the abandoned mop leaning beside the ballroom wall and quietly moved it away so nobody would trip over it in the dark. The gala officially ended before 10 o'clock, but nobody called it over. People simply drifted away in quiet. Embarrassment beneath the falling snow outside Hayes Capital. Investors left through private elevators with tense expressions and lowered voices. Executives avoided eye contact. Staff members cleaned abandoned champagne glasses from marble tables, while the soft jazz music finally stopped echoing through the empty ballroom. Sophia Carter remained near the windows long after most people disappeared. Manhattan shimmered below her in silver and white, beautiful and cold at the same time. She should have gone home hours ago. Instead, she stood motionless in her black heels, replaying every word she had said that morning. Better staff. Stay in your lane. Nice fake watch. The memories felt unbearable now. Across the ballroom, workers quietly folded linen tablecloths beneath dimmed chandeliers. Nobody noticed Sophia remove her diamond earrings slowly and place them beside an untouched glass of sparkling water. For the first time in years, she felt tired of pretending she belonged somewhere simply because she looked successful enough to stand there. Miss Carter, Sophia turned quickly. Vanessa Reed stood near the ballroom entrance holding a folder against her chest. Her expression looked calmer now, but not softer. Mr. Hayes wants to see you tomorrow morning. Sophia's stomach tightened instantly. Am I being fired? Vanessa hesitated briefly. I honestly do not know. The answer lingered heavily in the empty room. Sophia nodded once and looked back toward the windows. Snow continued falling over the city in slow silence. Did you know? She asked quietly. Vanessa followed her gaze toward the skyline. About him? Sophia nodded. No, Vanessa admitted. Very few people did. She stepped closer before lowering her voice slightly. He has done this for years. Different offices, different positions. Security guard, mailroom clerk, custodian. Sophia frowned faintly. Why? Vanessa gave a tired smile. Because he believes character reveals itself when people think someone is beneath them. The words settled deeply into Sophia's chest. Vanessa looked around the now empty ballroom. Most companies evaluate intelligence, she said quietly. Daniel Hayes evaluates kindness. Then she walked away, leaving Sophia alone beside the giant glass windows overlooking Manhattan. Down below, headlights moved through snowy streets like rivers of gold. Somewhere inside that enormous city, millions of people were working late shifts nobody noticed. Cleaning offices, driving buses, stocking grocery shelves. Lives Sophia had barely thought about before today. Her phone buzzed suddenly in her hand. A text message from her mother. How was the gala? Did you meet important people? Sophia stared at the screen for several long seconds before locking the phone again without answering. Important people. Earlier that morning, she would have described importance differently. Expensive suits, famous names, corner offices. Now she could not stop thinking about an older man quietly wiping coffee from a marble floor while everyone around him ignored his existence. Near midnight, Sophia finally left the ballroom and rode the elevator down alone. The polished silver doors reflected her expression back at her. Smaller somehow, less certain. When the elevator opened into the lobby, the building had grown almost silent. Security lights glowed softly across the marble floors while snow swirled beyond the revolving glass doors. And near the west hallway, someone was still working. Daniel Hayes slowly pushed a mop across the same lobby floor where Sophia spilled coffee that morning. He had changed into a dark wool coat over his gray uniform, but the silver watch remained visible beneath his sleeve. Sophia froze near the elevator entrance. Daniel glanced up briefly when he heard the doors open. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence between them no longer felt awkward, just honest. Sophia walked toward him slowly, heels quieter now against the marble. You are still working? She asked softly. Daniel looked down at the freshly cleaned floor. The building still needs cleaning. Something about that answer nearly broke her heart. She stopped a few feet away and lowered her eyes. I have been thinking about what you said. Daniel rested both hands lightly on the mop handle. And Sophia swallowed carefully. I do not think I have ever actually seen people before. The old billionaire studied her quietly beneath the pale lobby lights. Snow drifted against the windows behind him while distant traffic hummed outside in the winter night. Most people do not, he said gently. Sophia looked at the floor for a moment before speaking again. My father always said successful people earn respect. Daniel nodded once. And what do you think now? She glanced slowly around the empty lobby. At the polished marble, the caution signs, the quiet work nobody noticed until it stopped being done. Then her eyes returned to the man holding the mop. I think respect should not depend on someone's paycheck. For the first time all day, Daniel Hayes smiled. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale winter light and heavy silence. Snow still covered the sidewalks outside Hayes' capital, turning Manhattan soft and colorless beneath the early sky. Sophia Carter stood across the street from the 72-story tower with a paper coffee cup warming her hands, though she barely drank it. Normally, she loved mornings like this. Expensive coat, busy city, important building waiting for her across the avenue. But today felt different. Smaller somehow. The revolving glass doors turned slowly as employees entered the lobby carrying laptops and polished confidence. Security guards nodded politely at executives rushing toward elevators. Delivery workers rolled carts across the marble floor, while cleaning crews quietly emptied trash bins before the business day fully began. For the first time, Sophia noticed all of them. Really noticed them. The woman wiping fingerprints from the lobby glass looked exhausted. One of the maintenance workers limped slightly while pushing a supply cart. A security guard held the door open for 3 executives who never once looked at his face. Yesterday, Sophia would not have noticed any of it either. She crossed the street slowly and stepped inside the building. Warm air wrapped around her immediately, carrying the familiar scent of polished marble and expensive coffee. The lobby buzzed softly with conversation, but something had changed overnight. People spoke more carefully now. The data breach had spread across financial news. Before sunrise, reporters already waited outside the tower hoping for statements from Hayes' Capital executives. Sophia walked toward the elevators when she spotted Daniel near the reception desk speaking quietly with a janitorial employee old enough to be nearing retirement. The older worker looked worried while holding paperwork in trembling hands. Daniel listened patiently without interrupting once. Then he placed a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. "Take care of your wife first," Daniel said gently. "Your position here will still exist when you return." The man's eyes filled instantly. "Thank you, sir." Daniel nodded once before helping him gather the papers he accidentally dropped onto the marble floor. Sophia stood frozen near the elevators watching the exchange. Nobody else seemed surprised by it. A receptionist smiled softly while passing by. One of the security guards quietly called Daniel by his first name. There was no fear around him downstairs. No performance. Just respect. Real respect. Daniel looked up then and noticed Sophia standing across the lobby. "Good morning, Miss Carter." His voice carried the same calm warmth as always. Sophia walked toward him carefully. "Good morning." She hesitated before glancing toward the older janitor leaving through the lobby doors. "You know everyone here." Daniel slipped his hands into the pockets of his wool coat. "Most people want to be acknowledged more than they want to be admired." The sentence settled quietly between them. Sophia lowered her eyes for a moment. "Vanessa said you wanted to see me." Daniel nodded toward the private elevator hallway. "Come with me." Sophia's heartbeat quickened immediately. As they crossed the lobby together, employees subtly stepped aside for Daniel without being asked. Not because they feared him, because they respected him. The realization stayed with Sophia all the way upstairs. The private elevator opened directly into the executive floor overlooking Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the snowy skyline, while sunlight reflected off distant skyscrapers like silver fire. Sophia had dreamed of standing here since her first internship interview. Yet now the luxury around her suddenly felt strangely unimportant. Daniel led her into a quiet conference room lined with dark wood and old black and white photographs. Not financial awards. Family pictures. Construction workers. Subway platforms. Men in uniforms covered in dust beside unfinished buildings. Sophia paused near one photograph showing a younger Daniel standing beside an older man wearing a transit maintenance uniform. The same silver watch rested on the older man's wrist. "Your father?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded once. He cleaned subway stations in Brooklyn for most of his life. Sophia studied the photograph carefully. The older man's smile looked tired but proud. "He looks kind." Daniel smiled faintly. He was. Silence filled the room briefly while snow drifted beyond the glass windows. Then Daniel placed a thin employee evaluation folder onto the conference table between them. Sophia's stomach tightened instantly when she saw her own name printed across the front. "Do you know what most executives wrote about you before yesterday?" Daniel asked quietly. Sophia swallowed carefully. "Probably that I work hard." They wrote intelligent, ambitious, exceptional under pressure. He looked at her steadily. Not one person wrote compassionate. Sophia felt the words land heavily inside her chest. Daniel sat down slowly across from her. I am not interested in perfect employees, Sophia. Perfect employees protect their image. Good people protect other people. She lowered her eyes immediately. Outside the windows, snow continued falling softly over Manhattan, while the billionaire who once pushed a mop across the lobby quietly waited for her to understand the difference. The conference room remained quiet long after Daniel Hayes finished speaking. Snow drifted slowly beyond the giant windows overlooking Manhattan, while distant sirens echoed faintly through the city below. Sophia Carter sat motionless at the polished table, staring at the employee evaluation folder in front of her like it belonged to someone else. Intelligent, ambitious, exceptional under pressure. The words should have made her proud. Instead, they felt strangely empty now. Daniel rose from his chair and walked toward the windows overlooking the river. Morning light reflected softly across the silver watch beneath his sleeve. "Do you know what the hardest part of success is?" he asked without turning around. Sophia shook her head quietly. Remembering how to see people after the world starts treating you differently. She looked down at her hands. Perfect nails. Expensive jewelry. Everything carefully built to project success. Yet somehow she had never felt smaller. Daniel rested one hand lightly against the glass window. "Money changes the way strangers speak to you," he continued softly. "Doors open faster. Smiles become more polished. People begin performing around you instead of being honest." He turned slightly toward her. "That is why I started working downstairs." Sophia finally understood now. The janitor uniform had never been about hiding. It was about revealing everyone else. She glanced again at the black and white photograph on the wall. Daniel's father standing beside subway tracks in a faded maintenance uniform, proud despite the exhaustion in his face. "Were people cruel to him?" she asked carefully. Daniel smiled sadly. "Sometimes." His eyes drifted toward the photograph. But he never became cruel back. The room fell silent again. Somewhere beyond the conference room walls, assistants hurried through executive hallways carrying coffee trays and laptops, while billion-dollar meetings resumed across the tower. Life inside Hayes Capital continued moving forward. But inside Sophia, something had shifted permanently. Daniel walked back toward the table and sat across from her once more. "Tell me something honestly," he said calmly. "Yesterday morning, before you knew who I was, what did you see when you looked at me?" Sophia swallowed hard. The truth embarrassed her now more than anything else. "I saw someone unimportant." Daniel nodded gently, not offended. Most people would. She lowered her eyes immediately. "I was wrong." "Yes," he said softly, "but not because I am wealthy." That sentence settled heavily into the room. Daniel folded his hands carefully on the table. "You were wrong because you decided a person's value before learning anything about them." Sophia felt heat rise behind her eyes again. She blinked quickly, embarrassed by the emotion. Daniel noticed, but kept his voice calm. "Do you know how many people walk past me downstairs every day?" She shook her head slightly. "Thousands." He leaned back quietly. "Most never looked at my face. Some complained when floors were wet. Some snapped their fingers for directions." His expression remained peaceful somehow. A few were kind. Sophia whispered the question before she could stop herself. "And me?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Not harshly. Honestly. "You were becoming the kind of person success eventually destroys." The words hurt because they felt true. Sophia looked away toward the falling snow outside the windows. Her father had spent her entire childhood teaching her to climb higher than everyone else. Better schools, better clothes, better circles. Never weak, never ordinary. Somewhere along the way, she had mistaken status for character. Daniel stood slowly and walked toward a small coffee station near the wall. He poured 2 cups quietly before placing one beside her. "My father used to say something," he said gently. "He believed you could tell everything about a person by watching how they treated workers at restaurants." Sophia gave a faint, embarrassed laugh through the tightness in her chest. "I probably would have failed that test too." Daniel smiled slightly. "Maybe before yesterday." She looked up at him carefully then. "Why are you giving me another chance?" For the first time since entering the room, Daniel seemed to pause before answering. Snowlight reflected softly across the windows behind him while the city stretched endlessly below them. "Because shame can either harden people," he said quietly, "or wake them up." Sophia felt tears threaten again, but this time she did not look away from him. Daniel nodded gently toward the employee folder still resting on the table. "You are talented, Sophia. Truly. But talent without humility eventually becomes arrogance. He adjusted the cuff over his father's old watch once more. And arrogance, he said softly, is the fastest way to become blind while believing. You see everything. Outside the executive windows, Manhattan continued moving beneath the falling snow while inside the conference room. The young woman who once mocked a janitor finally began understanding the difference between success and worth. 3 months later, winter still lingered over Manhattan, but the city no longer felt as cold to Sophia Carter as it once had. Morning sunlight spilled across the glass towers of Midtown while crowds moved through the streets below in heavy coats and scarves, carrying coffee cups and tired expressions into another workday. Inside Hayes Capital, the lobby buzzed softly with familiar energy. Elevators chimed. Phones rang behind reception desks. Polished shoes crossed marble floors that reflected the city lights like still water. But something inside the building had changed. People greeted the security guards now. Executives held elevator doors for cleaning staff. Someone had even started leaving coffee and pastries each Friday morning for the overnight maintenance crew. Small things. Quiet things. Daniel Hayes noticed all of them. Sophia stepped through the revolving doors carrying 2 cardboard coffee trays carefully balanced in her hands. Gone were the diamond earrings and sharp designer heels she once treated like armor. Today she wore simple black flats and a navy wool coat dusted lightly with snowflakes. Several employees smiled as she crossed the lobby. Not because of her appearance, because she smiled back now. Near the reception desk, an elderly janitor struggled to lift a heavy supply box onto a maintenance cart. Without hesitation, Sophia set down the coffee trays and moved beside him. "Here," she said gently. "I have got it." The older man blinked in surprise. "Thank you, miss." Sophia smiled softly. "My name is Sophia." Together they lifted the box onto the cart. The janitor laughed quietly afterward. "You know, most people pretend they cannot see us down here." Sophia glanced around the busy lobby for a moment before answering. "I used to be one of them." The older man studied her face curiously, then smiled with surprising warmth. "Well," he said softly, "people can change." Across the lobby, Daniel Hayes stood near the security desk reviewing paperwork with Vanessa Reed. He looked up just in time to see Sophia helping the janitor straighten supplies on the cart before handing him one of the coffees she had brought downstairs. The older billionaire said nothing at first, but Vanessa noticed the faint smile that appeared beneath his calm expression. "You were right about her," she said quietly. Daniel watched Sophia laugh softly at something the janitor said. "No," he answered gently. "She decided to become right herself." Upstairs, the company still faced pressure from the data breach investigation, but something unexpected had happened in the months afterward. Employee satisfaction improved. Staff turnover dropped. Complaints about executive behavior nearly disappeared. People inside Hayes Capital had begun treating one another differently after learning the billionaire owner once cleaned their floors in silence. And somehow, the culture of the entire building shifted because of it. Later that afternoon, Sophia sat alone in the executive conference room reviewing reports while snow drifted quietly outside the windows. Her phone buzzed beside her laptop. A message from her mother appeared on the screen. "Your father saw your company in the news again. He says he is proud you are finally moving up in the world." Sophia stared at the message for a long moment. Then she slowly typed back, "I think I am finally learning how to be a better person instead." She hesitated before hitting send. Then she smiled faintly and placed the phone aside. A soft knock interrupted the quiet room. Daniel Hayes stepped inside, carrying 2 coffee cups. "Thought you might need this," he said. Sophia accepted the coffee with grateful surprise. "Thank you." Daniel walked toward the windows overlooking Manhattan while evening lights slowly awakened across the skyline. "Vanessa tells me your new employee mentorship program was your idea." Sophia nodded carefully. "I just thought new interns should spend one day working with every department in the building." Daniel glanced toward her, including maintenance. A small embarrassed smile crossed her face. "Especially maintenance." Daniel laughed quietly beneath his breath. The sound felt rare, honest. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Snow fell softly outside while the city glowed beneath the fading winter sky. Finally, Daniel looked toward the busy streets far below and adjusted the silver watch that once belonged to his father. "You know," he said softly, "most people spend their whole lives trying to look important." Sophia leaned back in her chair, holding the warm coffee cup between both hands. "And what actually makes someone important?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked toward the lobby many floors below where invisible workers still cleaned floors, carried boxes, and held doors open for strangers who rarely noticed them. Then he smiled gently, never making people feel invisible. Outside, Manhattan continued moving beneath the falling snow while inside Hayes' capital. The young woman who once mocked a janitor finally understood that the strongest people in the world are often the ones kind enough to notice everyone else.